team of high performers bring more high performers because smart people and good people like to work with other smart people and good people.
Welcome back to 40-Minute Mentor, the podcast on a mission to raise aspirations and inspire the next generation of category-defining founders, all in just 40 minutes. Today, we're joined by Rafel Jorda Siquier, founder and CEO of Open Cosmos, the UK-based satellite company on a mission to monitor and combat climate change. Founded in 2015, Open Cosmos delivered its first satellite in record time with a team of just 5 people. Since then, the business has scaled to over $100 million in satellite contracts, a team of over 130 employees in Spain, Portugal, Greece, and the UK, and has raised a whopping $50 million Series B funding round from top investors. Prior to starting Open Cosmos, Rafel worked at large corporations and innovative space startups, including Airbus Defence, Space, and Zero to Infinity. Although the Open Cosmos team has achieved incredible milestones over the last decade, they are only scratching the surface of the impact that they can have. So I am super excited to have Rafel on the podcast today to explore his founder journey in detail and hear more about his plans for 2025 and beyond. So, Rafel, a warm welcome to 40-Minute Mentor. How are you doing today?
Hi, James. Very well. And a pleasure to be here with you and to share something with your community.
I really appreciate it. Thank you for joining us. I can't wait to dig into your story. But what we always like to do on this podcast is get our listeners to learn a bit more about you, to warm you up with a few quick fire questions. So please, can you finish the following sentences after me? Number 1, the moment that defined my career was when?
Definitely when I founded Open Cosmos.
Yeah, fair enough. We'll come on to learn a lot more about that over the course of this conversation. My biggest failure to date is?
In general, I struggle a lot to say no. So my biggest failure is always trying to accommodate to the opportunities arising. And that sometimes causes trouble.
Yes, that's something I am definitely a yes man. I like to try and help people. I like to sort of take on stuff. And that's why I've burnt out a few times, I'll be honest. So yeah, that's something I need to get better at in 2025 as well. A skill I wish that I mastered earlier is?
I've learned to be pulled into these opportunities, actually. So before I used to push a lot for things to happen. And now it's more setting the right conditions to be pulled into the right things by customers, by partners. So I would say learning to be pulled.
That's a really, really good one. Thank you for sharing. And finally, a life lesson I keep coming back to is?
Less is more.
Yes, that's so true in so many different ways. Well, brilliant. Thank you for sharing. I can't wait to dig into all things Open Cosmos. But before we get to that, let's start at the beginning. I'd love to learn a bit more about what your upbringing was like, what your childhood was like, and how you think that has shaped the person you are today, the founder you are today, and the leader that you are today.
Yeah, so I was very lucky to be born in Mallorca, a small island in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, beautiful place. I come from a very loving and caring family. My parents are doctors, and I mentioned that because I think it's one of the things that has created a little bit my character. They are people that really like to give more than take, and that are always trying to help others. And that, I think, permeated in my identity very early. So coming from a place that is kind of a small, where people know each other, at the end of the day, it's an Iceland, and where in an environment where people care constantly about helping and solving other people's challenges, like doctors do, like really grew this kind of instinct in me, or natural way of behavior. And I think that it's an element of our culture at Open Cosmos that drives a lot of our purpose in what we do. So it has definitely impacted a lot, not only how I am, but also the company and the culture at Open Cosmos.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah. And it sounds like your parents, you mentioned about you like to say yes to things and help people. It sounds like that comes directly from your upbringing and your family. And that's a wonderful quality. It sounds like you very much brought that into the business. I have to ask, where did your fascination with space come from? Because that's obviously had a big impact on your career. So was that something that has been there all of your life?
Not really, to many people's surprise, because Look, I could tell you now a story, a super romantic story that when I was a kid, I looked at the stars in Mallorca and all of this, but it would not be true. Like, as a kid, I was super curious. I wanted to learn about absolutely everything. And this is another thing that I learned from my parents' curiosity, right? And being able to learn constantly from everything and everyone. And as a kid, I was interested in math, in physics, in philosophy, in art, in literally everything. So when I had to go and study to university, I didn't know what to choose. I remember I was fortunate that I had always been disciplined and a good student, so I could choose what I wanted to do, which gave even more opportunities. And I just didn't know what. And I decided to study aerospace engineering. I remember the rationale behind it now seems funny, but what's going to be something that I'm not particularly the best at and I will really struggle learning about on my own. So the opposite that what everyone would do, right? I always thought that learning about the interaction between physics and engineering in a challenging domain like space and aerospace would be something that would challenge me and that I would struggle to learn. So I decided to go in that path and I fell in love with it. First year at university, I started doing like projects with tons of people. We did supersonic sounding rockets, we did drones, we did software to emulate the different conditions. Had a lot of fun during those years. There were very tough years also in terms of learning and so on, but I enjoyed that fully. And that's what has sparked the interest in space. It came more from the compounded learning and the joy for projects rather than just the romantic ideas of a child.
No, fair enough. It's amazing how these things can, it's not always as you expect. I was expecting you to say, oh, I love space as a kid. I wanted to be an astronaut. But no, but it shows that curiosity, just being curious can lead to incredible things. And clearly you found your passion.
That's the other thing that sometimes people ask, like, would you like to be an astronaut? I said, no, I really like my feet on the ground. I really like actually to do things on Earth. I love our planet. And I'm really happy actually to help. And I admire the people that are go up there and want to go up there. But I'm very well in Mallorca or down here on Earth, to be honest.
Yeah, no, fair enough. You mentioned you worked as an aerospace engineer and then you founded Open Cosmos in 2015. So tell our audience, if you don't mind, about the origin story. What made you kind of take that leap to build your own business? How did it come about?
Yeah. When I am asked how things started, I cannot put an exact moment when the idea of Open Cosmos came together. And there was not this revelation moment. Actually, in one of the projects that I had been working at the university, we put a high resolution camera in a stratospheric balloon up to 40 kilometers. And we took pictures from there that resembled, obviously, it's not space, it's near space, but you have most of the atmosphere underneath you. So it resembled the space. You could see the curvature of Earth, the thin layer of the atmosphere, the black sky during the plain day. And I was, wow, with 300 euros and a few weekends of work from friends and so on, like we've got these amazing images. Wouldn't it be cool? And I remember saying to my friends, wouldn't it be cool someday we put a satellite in orbit with the constrained budgets and so on to do something like this? But obviously, that's not a business idea. That's just a dream in those moments, right? Then I went to work for space startups. I was fortunate then also to work at Airbus Defense on Space and learn from the MBI side. And during all that time, that kind of seed was planted there of could we, with satellites, address some of the big challenges, gather data down here, and rather than just selling them to a few big corporates or defense organizations around the world, actually try to democratize the access to this technology so the data can be used for solving climate, understanding the reality, understanding Earth, and everything that derives from that logistics, natural resources, access to water, urbanization, you name it, right? So when I was doing the MBA, I started working on putting together some of the potential business cases for that to be sustainable economically. And given my engineering background, I was actually also starting to prototype and to develop some of these technologies on my own. And I remember there I said, "Oh, why is no one in Europe really doing this? There is the talent." I was 26 years old, by the way. So there is this sense of naiveness in the moment. I said, this is possible. Why are people just doing satellites for 400 million each when they can be done for for 10 satellites, depending on what kind of sensing capabilities you fly? And I came to learn that basically it was the companies that were winning these 400 million kind of contracts have no incentive to parasitize their own business model, right, and bring those costs down and enable this kind of value propositions from the data side to emerge and said, okay, someone has to do it. No one is really doing it. I'm going to try it. And again, out of the naiveness, I said, I have a little bit of savings. I'm going to try to find the best place where I can. My savings, by the way, were 9K. Okay. So it was like I can live for some time somewhere and dedicate myself fully to trying to traction commercial opportunities of this. So I applied to several accelerators. They all actually really liked the idea. I decided to come to the best one, in my opinion, which was Entrepreneur First in the UK. That's how I ended in the UK. And also because the strategy on a space was very solid, there was an ecosystem of entrepreneurship that was moving. And I knew that what I was going to try to do was nearly impossible, really hard. So I wanted to be in an environment that mitigated as many risks and barriers as possible. And yeah, that was a very, very good decision because it helped me learn from so many smart people and catalyze the development of Open Cosmos very quickly.
That's incredible. Yeah, we had the privilege of having Alice Benting on the podcast a few years ago, and I'm a huge admirer for the impact EF has had on the ecosystem and the amazing companies that have spun up out of it. It's testament to what a great program it is and just the caliber. So yeah, very good decision, I think, and clearly you've gone on to achieve
Mm.
incredible things. I guess before we get into all those successes and all those learnings, I'm not an aerospace expert. I'm sure most of our listeners won't be. So, in simple terms, can you just explain exactly what you're building with Open Cosmos, why it's so significant for the industry, and how does it benefit people sort of outside of the industry?
Yeah, so at Open Cosmos, we design, manufacture, and operate satellites end to end. So people come to us with a data need or an information requirement, and we literally design all of the hardware, assemble, test it, and operate it in orbit so they can get that. And this can be useful for telecommunication purposes, for Earth observation purposes, so looking down on Earth and understanding what's happening on Earth, for science, any of those domains. We've done missions in each one of those. And the key thing here is not about only the technology that you bring up, it's actually what can be done based on the data that those satellites collect. So, to give you some examples, now we have satellites in orbit that take high resolution imagery of Earth, and with machine learning and analytical tools, you can understand things like what's the impact that climate has in different areas when there is a catastrophe. We are particularly now focused on domains like wildfires, floods, and areas like this.
Very prevalent given this week the LA fires. Yeah.
Exactly. We are also paying a lot of attention to the use of natural resources, where things are extracted, where there is certain kind of resources that need to be preserved, how those resources can be used sustainably. In energy, there is also a lot of work to be done. Energy efficiency and energy transition. One of the things I'm really excited is like we launched a short-wave infrared satellite to orbit, start actually monitoring with that kind of sensor thermal differences in different regions and increasing the resolution and the wavelengths of some of these infrared imagers might allow us actually to detect the difference in temperature that there might be in buildings when you look over a city in winter, which is correlated with the amount of energy that is dissipated and therefore energy consumption. There are tons of applications that can be served by this data. If you cannot measure something, it's very difficult for you to understand it and then to see the progress in the right direction, right? And big global challenges like climate, like energy transition, like logistics, natural resources require those accurate measurements. That's what our satellites do.
Amazing. Such a brilliant business and so impactful. I mentioned in the introduction that you built your first Open Cosmos satellite in under 6 months with a very small team, which is very impressive. What were those early days like? Can you talk us through, if you take yourself back almost 10 years, what were some of the biggest challenges you had to overcome? What were some of the biggest learnings from the early days?
The early days, the more that I look now back with 10 years have passed, by the way, time flies, right? But now that I look back, it just was just so intense and crazy days, right? I remember when I started the company, I thought, well, it's better if I don't go right now pitching to investors because I'm 26. Who's going to invest in a kid saying that wants to do a satellite company? So my obsession was, and I had very little money in terms of survival money. So my obsession was how can I get the first customer that aligns what I do for them with the vision and the different stepping stones that I need to follow in order to be able for the ultimate vision of understanding Earth to be able to happen. And the first idea that I had is like, again, out of one of the projects that I had been done a few years before at university, I started developing CANSAT so students could learn on how to emulate satellites just for learning purposes. And I decided that that was a good way to start. I contacted the European Space Agency. I learned that they were going to do a competition in Europe with all of the universities across Europe for this. And I thought, well, maybe the students can use a little bit of help so they don't have to start everything from scratch, but basic electronics board and so on. That was our first contract. And the company actually was, I just incorporated fast so I could issue a bill to get that first payment. And it was huge for me at the moment, but it was only 30K, right? But that, imagine what it meant that I could start bringing some people, I could dedicate more time then to the next steps. And that early traction and the delivery of that project, also with a customer like the European Space Agency, you build the connections, you understand how things work, was very meaningful.
And great validation.
I wouldn't even dare to say still validation, but yes, an opportunity, right? Because for validation, I really wanted to make sure that it was clear that that was not space technology. It was just an educational tool. But I wanted to get into getting a satellite as quickly as possible. So I started to look all of the satellite opportunities that would be out there. And I stumbled on a program from the European Commission that had been running for 9 years. They had to deliver a lot of satellites, and it was apparent that many of those satellites would not make the launch slot in time. And I started suggesting Open Cosmos as a backup company to start to try to deliver one of those satellites, just as a backup, right? And I think by insistence and so on, they said, yeah, you can be a backup if some of the satellites and you make it in time. I'm sure that no one expected us to deliver a satellite in time. We will be able to launch you and there will be, payments associated to that and so on. So we said yes, right? As we were saying before. But that yes was out of a lot of pushing, I would dare to say. And then I pushed also and I convinced some of the brilliant people that I had studied and worked with in the past also to come and join Open Cosmos. This was month 2 or 3 of the company, right? So imagine month 2 or 3 getting the first contract for a satellite. I managed to actually, thanks to that, attract top friends and talent that had amazing careers in the space sector. I'm so grateful that people like Jordi, Barrera, Aleix, like my co-founders really came and joined. And thanks to all of that, we had a very, very big challenge in front of us, which was deliver a satellite in 6 months so it could be in orbit. Thankfully for that, we had been working for years in ideating, or I have particularly started preliminary designs of some of these things. Jordi, Alej, and the early team were the most talented, would freak out anyone, like how talented and capable they were. And thanks to all of these things, we managed actually to hit every single delivery milestone and deliver the first satellite of the entire program, which is a huge milestone that enable us to have like a huge recognition within Europe. Then the European Space Agency also started getting, we won contracts with them, with other customers, and one satellite brings you to another, and here we are, 10 years later, being one of the fastest growing space companies, not only in Europe, but in the world.
This episode is sponsored by Capsule, the certified B Corp redefining insurance for high growth scaling businesses. As a neo broker powered by cutting edge API technology, Capsule streamline the insurance process, removing manual hassle and delivering tailored solutions that evolve with your business. They support ambitious companies across fast paced, innovative sectors such as fintech, health tech, SaaS, and sustainability, including clients like Bloom and Wild, Moneybox, Castor, and What Three Words. If you're a venture-backed startup looking to outsource the buying and management of your insurance, find out more on www.capsulecover.com. Now, back to today's 40-Minute Mentor. It's such an incredible story, and I love the fact you focused on getting that first customer, and right, because so many people start with raising capital, and actually just the added credibility you'll have from those sorts of big customers early on and the early commercial traction is just so impressive. And I think really important in this climate that we're in at the moment for other founders to hear about that might be listening to this. And I guess to build on that, you reached profitability within 5 years. And clearly you were making revenues, very fast. But to hit profitability so quickly is hugely impressive. And lots of founders listening to this, I guess we've shifted from that kind of growth at all cost mentality where all the founders we're working with, all the scale ups we're working with now are looking to grow, but in a sustainable way. So, how did you approach building a business in a more, I guess, economically conscious way, a profitable way? And what advice do you have for others listening to this about how you can get there and things to think about to achieve that?
Yeah, I think way too often actually economical sustainability has not been a strong enough point in many of the business plans for startups and for companies. And but there is no right advice for this, right? Every company is different. Some approaches work for some others not. Again, our approach worked in our sector against all odds. It's probably the most capital intensive sector one can think of. It's probably the one where development and product development takes the longest, right? But you need to challenge the status quo if you want to really disrupt and have very impactful companies, right? And in a way, that youth naiveness of the 26-year-old that thought that this made sense and why not push it is what helped. At the same time, that naiveness was balanced with, I think, common sense and thinking, hey, I really need this to be sustainable. Yeah, maybe if I moved to the US, there would be some investors that would put a lot of capital in this, but what would that mean for the purpose of the company? Would I be able to sell this technology back to Europe or everywhere in the world easily? Would I be, being an European, like in the US, would I be able actually to start a space company? The space sector in the US is very militarized, right? So all of these things were there. And there was a concatenation of key decisions, I think, in those early days that led to us thinking we need to build a company that is based on sustainability and organic growth. Of course, you need to raise at moments, and we have done so, as you mentioned, successfully. Like last about 14 months ago, we raised a 50 million round, but we were already profitable. So why do you raise? To be able to expand your offering, to be able to scale, to grow. And I don't have a key advice in this context, but one of the key things that I would say is like think customer first, validate, grow that traction with the customer, because that makes it so much easier to raise from the right people and also to raise at better valuations, right? If you are thinking about the raising topic, having the commercial traction, it's absolutely key. If you are thinking from a company and a strategic purpose, if you don't have a customer, you don't have a company. If you are not solving a problem and you are not being useful to someone, you might have some IP or some technology, but that's very different to having a problem solving entity, which is what I see as the most meaningful companies.
Totally agree. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. And we're going to come back to fundraising because that's obviously a topic a lot of our listeners are aspiring or current founders are. It's a pain point and a challenging thing to do, and you've done it very successfully. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But clearly, there's been amazing milestones, significant partnerships, great revenue, profitable growth, and building a very high performing team along the way. I'd love to learn about that transition from going to a very small but high performing team to then scaling a big team and doing things at real scale in terms of advancing your processes and systems and stuff. What did you find most challenging in that going from startup to scale up phase? And do you have any thoughts on what has made the biggest difference in sort of that transition? Because it's often what can make and break a company. So you've clearly done it really well. I'd love to hear your reflections on that.
Yeah, I must start by saying, like, we are still in that journey, right? We are still relatively small. People think that we are 500, 600 people. We are 150 people. It's just truly exceptional individuals, the ones we've been able to put behind this purpose, and therefore very effective and very performing and very productive, right? But still a relatively small team. And I think that keeping things small in the beginning is a massive advantage because it's all about communication. And if you are five and you are all in one room, communication happens like this, like your brains are connected, right? If you are 10, yes, still there, but maybe you need to start setting some processes. If you are 50, you definitely need a structure. And in each one of these growth steps that we have taken, now with 150, I'm starting not to know everyone, right? So I need to rely on the relationships and flow of information and the communications that the other managers do to be able to understand and have structure and reporting. And this is just going to go the way in that direction. The key advice here is focus on communication. Then the other key advice I would say is like build joint sense of purpose. That is like the northern star. So at Open Cosmos, you can ask anyone in the company. They will all be very excited to tell you that what makes them wake up early in the morning or work really hard on what we do is that because we are building satellite infrastructure that helps understand Earth and solve the global challenges, right? So that purpose of helping and helping provide data to solve climate and seeing the impact of that. I remember when 4 months ago, when there was the catastrophe in Valencia, where there was the huge floods, and 4 hours after the floods, we started taking images of the situation, being able that to share in this case with the people, and some of the people in our company were from the region, right? It's very meaningful. Now extrapolate that to the whole world, right? This is the kind of impact that drives us. And having that shared sense of purpose on why we really do this, it's extremely important. The last piece of advice on something that has really helped us nourish like a very high performing team while scaling, we don't set rules, fixed rules to the extent that we can until we have certainty that those rules are not going to change ever, right? So what we set with our culture is frameworks, values, right? And those values are the framework, the concepts around which people can take decisions independently. So we have 8 values. Everyone in the company knows them. We use them constantly: humbleness, ambition. We use them constantly in our day to day discussions. So, is this a humble approach to learning about this topic? Are we thinking ambitiously enough? Is this effective? And these words come up constantly in the decision making process. And that liberates from having to set a fixed set of rules. You bring the agency into super high caliber talented individuals that know in some cases better than me or anyone else on their specific topic. You bring that agency into them, you empower them and say, hey, the only thing you have to make sure is that you work with this envelope of values. So still, all of the actions that we take as an organization are aligned and going in the right direction. So that's something that has really helped. So rather than a lot of policies, a lot of control, a lot of monitoring, it's like, hey, well-intentioned people with a clear purpose that works within a system of values that is coherent.
Yeah, that's so powerful. I love that. And we're going to come on to talking about team culture and hiring as well, because you've clearly been very thoughtful about that, but also give your team a lot of autonomy to make decisions, which I think is so important. I said we'd come back to fundraising, and you've raised over $60 million. So you have done this very well from top investors like ETF Partners, Trill Impact, and incredible sort of successful entrepreneurs who have become investors like Tabit Hinrichs, the co-founder of Wise. So, as somebody that started focusing more on commerciality and like the sort of getting that early traction rather than thinking investor sort of fundraising first, when did you decide was the right time to go down the VC route? Clearly, you've mentioned very capital intensive business, so there was always going to be a necessity at some point. But how did you make those decisions, and how have you approached the various funding rounds that you've gone on? Have you any advice? I'm sure will be hugely valuable for people that are going through this process at the moment.
Yeah, it's a great question because we haven't done it in the most conventional way, I would dare to say, right? So I like to go fundraising where I have clarity on that, how those resources are going to achieve a step up kind of opportunity. If I don't have the clarity on that, I would rather not raise and keep sustainably growing. You can only do that if you are in the position of sustainability on your own business model, right? So in a way, it's like you don't raise out of need, you raise out of the opportunity. And this is easier to say than to do because that means that you need to be frugal at some of the points before you have the right product market fit, and you need to be very mindful on how you use your resources and you prioritize very effectively and you focus to keep that sustainable. But then also you have to have the ability to see, okay, this is opportunities now, there is materializing, it's actually happening. is what enables me to actually perform at that level. And to put a very simple example, our Series A round basically was one of those moments where I could see the satellite contracts actually coming. I had to deliver them in a particular period of time. If I wasn't upgrading my facilities and growing my team rapidly, I would have failed at delivering that commitment, right? But the commitment was there. The sustainability without those commitments would have continued, right? So as a just like, okay, I really need to step up. And in the last round, it was exactly the same. And that's why probably why our rounds have always been oversubscribed. Is because we've been patient and very methodical at understanding from a sustainable perspective what's the step change. And when we see that step change clearly, and the advantage that we can have from resources, from technologies, from partners, from because it's not only about the raising, it's all of the things together, right? Then we say, that's the time. Who wants to join? And usually by that time we have pretty solid financial metrics and performance metrics that the investors love and that differentiate us from potentially other people more raising with a vision kind of approach.
Yeah, so inspiring to hear. And I think it's great advice for anyone going through this process at the moment. So thank you so much for sharing that. Coming on to hiring and culture, which is, as a headhunter, my favorite topic. I'd love to know how you've approached hiring with Open Cosmos over the years. Clearly, you started by bringing in some of your friends from your studies, but how has that evolved over the years? And to ask a difficult question alongside that, I'd love to also know what you have found most difficult when it comes to hiring, because it is not an easy thing to do. And I think I want to give a holistic answer to this because it's often people to look at the amazing stuff, but it's a challenging thing to do. So I'd love to hear your experience.
Yeah, we try to keep things as simple as possible. So, number one thing to check is do they have a natural common sense of the purpose? Do they really believe in what we're doing? Is that something that they would do no matter what? That's a big important point. Then, second, are they naturally aligned with our values? Like those frameworks that I was talking about, is it naturally, you can see the alignment with those values? Do they use some of these words in any way, or actually do they have examples where that shines through? Those are the first very early kind of checks, right? Then the other key important thing that we pay a lot of attention of is like a team of high performers bring more high performers because smart people and good people like to work with other smart people and good people, right? So we don't have an elitistic approach towards this. It's rather the opposite. We don't care about where people have studied or what they have studied and so on. We care what is number one, the attitude towards these challenges and the learning that everyone, no matter how smart they are, they have to do always, right? How fast can they learn? What's the attitude? How fast can they actually learn? And then second, yeah, of course, what kind of skills, experience, or background they might have that might alleviate that learning process or actually catapult it, right? But that's the third thing. The first one is attitude and speed of learning. Because if people have that and you put them in an environment of other high performers that also want to thrive along, magic happens, right? Actually, you need to contain all of that horsepower that things move in a single focused direction, right? And that's why the purpose check is so important to do first, right? Because if they have that northern star and they pull in that direction, I actually want them to find the solutions to create and to empower them to come up with better solutions than the one that anyone in the team might have already found. And that's part one of our core values, which is this humbleness of being willing to learn constantly from anyone in order to pursue that big ambition. So yeah, that's the number one thing that I would say that we do particularly well at Open Cosmos in the recruitment and when bringing people alongside with us. So one of the things that I did wrong in the past is that because of what I've explained before, that you keep things sustainable, then you have a huge opportunity that comes, and then you raise the resources and you bring all of the talent. That means that sometimes you need to bring a lot of talent all in one go. You know what I mean? Like very aggressively. So when you are in these very fortunate step changes of like you move from second league to Premier League kind of thing, right? You need to onboard and to bring people without cutting corners on all of this process very quickly. And like everything in life, if you have a lot of volume, the probabilities of some of that turning out to be bad is higher than if you have a smaller volume and you can would pay a lot more attention to that. And that's something that I completely, the probabilities of this and the dynamics of this is something that I completely underestimated when I did our first race, and I brought what I thought was super smart, really talented people. And sometimes I feel we cut corners on some of these culture, purpose, and value things just because of how talented and capable they were or experienced. And that backfire hugely because it goes in detriment of some of these strong culture driven and performance driven attitudes that we want to nourish in the company, right? And it's like everything, like when you have something going wrong, usually spreads faster than the good things. It's like when people get ill, I don't know, you get ill, you go into the underground, and all of a sudden you get a lot of more people ill, right? Something similar happen when there is something that goes wrong with the team. It's and you need to be constantly reminding of the good things, what is important, what not, and do the hard thing of also saying you did a mistake. This is not the right place for you. I particularly struggle a lot doing that because I don't give up easily on people. I particularly people that comes on board with the mission, and I'm like, let's find a way for you to correct that, or let me support you with changing that. And yeah, that's something that probably I'm still learning on how to do and to be more effective doing. Fortunately, I have an amazing team around me that is very good also at doing the right things for the organization. So obviously all of these things are not single point of failure. But yeah, that's our experience with regard to recruitment and what's probably the hardest.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that. I think it's important for everyone to hear. Alongside all the great talent you've hired, you've also made mistakes, and that is part of founder life. And I don't know anybody that gets hiring 100% right. But being thoughtful about it, really focusing on value alignment, these are the things that can make a real difference. And you've built a really diverse team as well across different countries and cultures, which is for me a hugely important thing. I think the best companies are the most diverse companies, and to do that successfully, not enough tech companies are like that. And I think it says a lot about your leadership and also the culture you've created that is able to attract diverse talent and obviously retain them and make it an inclusive culture. We're kind of getting towards the end of the interview, but there's still some questions I would love to cover. And linked to hiring, I should really ask, if we're recording this at the start of 2025, what are your big hiring plans for the year ahead? What do you look for? For people listening to this saying, I really want to work for Open Cosmos, what exciting things have you got when it comes to hiring? And what do you look for in people? What tips can you give them to anyone that wants to reach out?
Yeah, no, it's super exciting times now at Open Cosmos because we have two products super consolidated, having like an amazing product market fit, and one product which is the Data Cosmos that has tremendous potential for all of the analytics solutions and so on to go for the downstream. So it feels it's one of these moments where there's going to be another step change in the organization, and everyone that is part of these moments just has to learn and grow so fast in their careers, in their capabilities, in their personality, in every single factor that compounds an individual, that I think it's a very, very attractive moment to join the company. The other thing that makes it very attractive is that we are in 4 countries now, as you've mentioned. So UK, Spain, Portugal, Greece, and we are nourishing those pools of talent and capabilities also around us in those geographies. The exciting thing that I think is going to happen in 2025 is that we are going to grow also beyond Europe. So we are going to move to new geographies, and that's going to bring a new dimension of diversity and capability and talent into the company. You've mentioned how diverse we are in terms of where people come from when working at Open Cosmos. That's right. That's our secret weapon. Because to be very honest, like we do a lot, space technology and space data is international market by nature. So you have people from those places of the world. You understand a lot better the dynamics, the culture, what matters, what not, what are the real issues, and then you can relate better to customers in those geographies if you have the person from there living and breathing that. And that aligns also all of the team, the purpose, because they see the impact not only global in an ethereal well, but locally in where they are having that impact. And this is just so rewarding and so beautiful. I feel really fortunate that we've been able actually to engage so many talented people from so many different places in the world. It's a real unfair advantage in front of anyone else wanting to do business in this sector.
Well, everything you've said, I'm sure you're gonna get a lot more applications off the back of this podcast because it really sounds like a very special culture. Obviously, a hugely impactful mission, And clearly great leadership. So thank you for sharing that. Before we get to our 2 wrap-up questions, climate change and the climate crisis is top of mind for so many of us at the moment, rightly so, because it's an existential threat to our livelihoods. And you've already shared some like real tangible examples of how Open Cosmos is playing a really important role in the fight. But this year ahead, we start 2025 with wildfires across LA, destroying homes and people losing their lives. It is so front of mind. So what call to action do you have for our listeners as somebody that really cares about this topic? Is there anything you want to leave them with in terms of a final message on that point?
Yes, absolutely. That they look at data and satellite data as a tool for them to build amazing business or amazing solutions to these problems. I feel that space technology and the space infrastructure is exactly at the same point right now that the computer was fully 40 years ago, when the use of the PC and the emergence of the internet catalyzed, the growth of a lot of application solutions for better communication between us, for understanding, for especially for having this podcast, right? The same is being enabled right now with satellite global data and with the use of artificial intelligence, data processing techniques, and capabilities. We can come to understand reality based on these data. So I would encourage them to look at space technology and data not as something fancy and out of another world, but actually just a tool that is there available to them, like they have a computer or they have a mobile phone.
Amazing. Thank you so much. We're at our wrap up questions. I've loved our conversation, Rafael. Thank you again. But this is 40-Minute Mentor. So I have to ask, if you could be mentored by anyone, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
I would love to know, to learn from Jason at NVIDIA. I think he's just a phenomenal leader, founder. Yeah, if he could mentor, that would be a dream mentor, to be honest.
Okay, we'll put it out into the world. Who knows? One day I'd love to get him on the podcast. So if that ever happens, I'll put you guys in touch. Finally, what is one piece of advice that could be career or life advice that you'd like to leave our listeners with today?
Dare to take a first step. Usually, things that matter are not clear on how they are going to happen. But if we don't take a first step to believe that we can make them happen, they will never. So sometimes I find both in the professional and in the personal domain, people try to want to have like everything sorted out before they take the first step, and it's the other way around. You need to know what matters and take a step, even blindly sometimes, in that direction, and don't give up.
Yeah, it's really inspiring advice to end an inspiring conversation. I've loved every second of that. Hugely impressed by everything you've built. Love your mission, love your culture, and I'm super excited for what sounds like it's going to be an epic year. So wishing you all the very best from the JBM team, the 40-Minute Mentor team, and all our listeners. And thank you so much for sharing your story and your wise mentorship with us all.
Thank you, James. Privileged to have joined.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. I really hope that you found it useful and inspiring. If we have left any questions unanswered, or if you have any feedback or guest recommendations for future series, then please make sure you get in touch on info@jbmc.co.uk. I often get asked by listeners how you can help us spread the word about 40-Minute Mentor. There are 2 simple ways you can help. Firstly, share this episode on your preferred social media platform, and LinkedIn is probably where I'm most likely to see it. And you can also leave us a review on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Every share on social media and review left on the podcast platforms really helps us to get 40-Minute Mentor in front of new audiences and share the power of mentorship even further. Thank you so much for your ongoing support, and I look forward to seeing you again next Wednesday for even more pocket-sized mentorship.